Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a very special edition of Travel Trends live from Las Vegas. I am joined by an extraordinary special guest. It's a huge honor. And actually, if there was one reason for coming, it's going to be this conversation right now with the founder and CEO of Virtuoso, Matthew Upchurch.
Well, thank you for having me, Dan. Really, it's quite an honor as well here.
Well, the last time I was in Vegas, I was watching you on stage and your family. It was an incredible. So my very first time at Virtuoso. And actually, I really want to start there because here we are at the Forbes Summit, and we'll talk about that. But I really want everyone to get an understanding. Many people know Virtuoso. Many people listening to this are like, of course we know Virtuoso. But even if you know Virtuoso, you don't know Virtuoso the way Matthew knows Virtuoso. And I really want to get the origin story because I know people love that about this show. And here's the perfect person that has really transformed this entire industry globally sitting here beside me. So Matthew, if you'd be so kind, tell us how you created Virtuoso.
Well, first of all, I mean, it's one of these situations where I was very blessed. So I grew up on the partner side. My father was one of the founding members of the United States Tour Operators Association. He had a company called Percival Tours, amongst other things. That was his main business.
Right.
So he was more of a traditional tour operator. His innovations were really opening up a lot of the world. Like he was really the first major player to open up African safaris back in the 60s. Yeah. Obviously he started with Europe and all that, but then expanded all over the world. So I grew up on that side of the business. I also was born in Mexico City, lived there till I was 12. We were involved in some things in Mexico around tourism as well, and all that. And then what happened is I moved to Fort Worth to go to college. And then I did agency sales for a year for Percival Tours. And it's funny because after doing that for a year, if you'd have told me that I was going to hang out with travel agents for the rest of my life, I would have run out the back door yelling and screaming. And sometimes when I say that, I don't want to be disrespectful because it's like, but it isn't the profession that it is today, right? But then what happened is I left the family company. I went and developed software for a couple of years. I'm too much of a people person. So I came back to travel.
I can't see you develop
I
software.
love technology in the service of humanity.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a big passion of mine. But I came back and then I helped us grow our corporate travel and retail travel business. And then in 1985, we bought a travel agency in Tyler, Texas, out in the middle of nowhere. That was a member of this organization that was started in 1950 called Allied Travel. And one of the things that Percival did was we were an operator for not only scheduled departures, but if you were a travel agency and you wanted to do bespoke travel, like FIT, foreign independent travel, right? Bespoke itineraries for individuals or groups, Percival was a company that individual agencies could come to. And we would then basically put it all together, package it up and make it available and put it and do it for them. Well, Allied was a group of almost all European expat, boutique, bespoke travel agency owners that ideated the idea for Allied Travel in 1949. They opened up their offices in Midtown Manhattan in 1950. Wow. And basically what it was, if you were a small boutique entrepreneurial agency in 1949, renting a telex machine was a big deal. Renting an IBM word processor because you couldn't buy them, you had to release them from IBM.
Remember that?
Yeah. The other one was there weren't these fancy little things called credit cards. So in 1949, if you wanted to do business with a hotel, you had to have a one-to-one credit relationship and you had to create vouchers. Then you had to pay by wire transfer. Now, you used to pay every 90 days, right? Which is so funny. But imagine then doing a wire transfer in 1950, there goes your profitability.
Sure.
Then in the profession of bespoke travel, there are three major areas of expertise: itinerary design and planning, costing and contracting, and operations. Try finding somebody with those skill sets anywhere outside of New York City, maybe LA a little bit, in 1950. They were the beginning of the jet era, golden age of travel was just starting post World War II. You couldn't find those people. And even if you did find it, because member number one of Allied was in Columbus, Ohio, even if you did find that person, you couldn't afford them. You didn't have enough business to build an entire team.
Yeah.
So these group of independent entrepreneurs hired, and it's funny, they hired a Swiss guy to run it because all the people that had those skills had worked for the old Wago Lee, the old Thomas Cook, but they knew that the Brit wouldn't listen to the French and the French wouldn't listen to the German, whatever. So they put a neutral Swiss in charge of the whole thing, and they collectively, quote unquote, purchased all that technological equipment. They collectively paid the salaries of all of these people to create their own kind of captive, almost like captive insurance, their own captive operator. And the one thing that I love about this story, which is why these people blew my mind, when I met them, they completely changed my mind about what a travel agent, in those days, we were calling them travel agents, of what a really, truly professional travel agent was like, because they were not only masters in artistry, their knowledge of the destinations and all this, but also what attracted me to them was this whole idea of how entrepreneurs can come together to do something collectively that you can't do alone. So here's an example. I did a talk at Cornell University on the evolution of the travel agent, which is kind of funny because I was not the greatest academic in the world. So the fact I was doing a lecture at Cornell was kind of funny, for a little bit ironic for me. But I told the story. I said, and then these guys would pool all of their vouchers to, let's say, Claridge's in London or the Crillon in Paris, all the bookings of all the different agencies into one giant wire transfer. And then they would send a telex saying, it's 175,000 pounds. And then they would, in the telex, voucher number, blah, 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 is, 1,200 pounds, this one, whatever. So once I told the story, I told all these Cornell students, now that I've told you this origin story, please don't ever lose your humility, because for the record, your generation did not invent crowdsourcing or crowdfunding. These guys were doing it in 1950. Now, you may have applied technology and scaled it. So for me, the reason I love that you asked me this story is because I turned 60 2 years ago, and I happened to be where we were having a symposium, and I turned 60, and then the next day I was on stage in the Four Seasons Lisbon. And the first thing that I said on stage was, I am so blessed that I'm standing here today, having just turned 60, because when I was 26 years old, I was lucky enough to find a group of 60-year-old plus entrepreneurs who were willing to collaborate with some 26-year-old kid who had these wild ideas, and we were able to work it. And even today, somebody who's become a good friend is Chip Conley. And one of the things I love about what he wrote in Wisdom at Work, The Making of the Modern Elder, about his experience at Airbnb, is I'm like really passionate about intergenerational collaboration. So I love that origin story because I'm here because all these years I've served this community. It's evolved. It's grown. We pretty much changed the perspective of what a travel agent is into a travel advisor.
Yeah. I mean, this is the conversation I've really always wanted to have, because I came into the travel industry during the .com era, and I was looked at when I worked at Carlson Wagonly and worked with all these travel agents as the person that was going to bring their roles to an end, because I was bringing online booking into reality. And it was one of the things that so resonated with me being at the Global Virtuoso conference here in Vegas in August, was the top line revenue and the growth of Virtuoso and the luxury travel market. You could have found very few people and asked them what the business would look like in 25 years time. But you had a prescient view of the future. And obviously so that's what I really wanted to ask you here, is that you obviously had a vision for Virtuoso and what it could be. And that vision, has it excelled or gone beyond what you imagined? Or is this what you kind of looked forward to, building this global business?
Oh man, if I sat here and go, oh yeah, man, I knew this thing. No, hey man, no. All I knew was that I had found a group of people that absolutely inspired me. And all I wanted to do was say, well, guys, if you got together in 1950 to collaborate around, for example, operations, I know that you guys, for example, your clients that know you, love you. So why don't we do the same thing in marketing that you did in operations? Because your biggest competitor as smaller independent agencies at the time, right, is not that you don't do a great job. It's that a lot of these organizations that have huge marketing power, basically you're not getting the business because the customer doesn't know any better.
Yeah.
Or we're XYZ brand, we're, I won't name any big brands. And they make people think, well, that little agency can't compete with me because I've got this, I've got that, whatever. So it wasn't that. The vision was always, how do you improve the relationship between the customer and the advisor and the partner to create this, we keep talking about customer journeys and what technology is going to do and all that kind of stuff.
The connected trip.
And and the connected trip, which is absolutely right. But I think what a lot of times got lost in that is, something that's ascribed to us that we started talking about, now you hear it all the time, is the power of human connection.
Yeah.
So in the late 90s, I had been serving the Virtuoso. Well, at that time, we were called API Travel Consultants.
Yeah, tell me that. I want to hear that story.
Well, it was the combination of my family business, which was Percival Tours, and Allied Travel. So for the first few years, it was Allied Percival International. And then when we started really focusing on that, the real kind of positioning was the advisor, right? The consultant. And then we became API Travel Consultants, focusing more on that. But then what happened is we got involved with, then we did a lot of things with marketing, right? We created the first basically cooperatively built customer database of affluent travelers. So while the American Express Platinum Card, which was established in 1987, while they had this incredible growth, right? We were building our database, but it was the private Rolodexes. And the reason we got the members, and by the way, I have friends of mine in the industry that said, you're going to go ask these people to hand over their customer list to you so that you can then put it in a central place and then do marketing on behalf of all the members.
Right.
And that's how that got started. So the reality is so now I've been working with these incredible people for 13 years. The OTA revolution comes along. Everybody, the airline commission cuts happened 50% overnight.
Yep.
In Delta, 1985. Everybody thinks we're dinosaurs, but I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. The generation that's coming, because we had a keynote speaker in 1997 from a company called AgeWave, and Ken Dykewald, the founders, become a very dear friend, and that was one of those keynotes where they're talking about how the baby boomers were going to change and had already changed, for example, financial services.
Yes.
So if you want to look at what happened with travel agents, all you have to look at is what happened with stockbrokers. Because when the baby boomers got to their peak savings years, they said, I'm not taking this BS. And they reinvented the online revolution and they invented that business. So I'm sitting there thinking, wait a minute. The generation that invented the personal shopper, the personal chef, the personal this is going to do everything DIY? I don't think so. But then I realized, and I was really mad. And sometimes I say, how did we rebrand? You know why we rebranded? Because I was ticked off. I was so mad that the people that I had served for 13 years were being put in the same lowest common denominator of the insults towards travel agents.
Right.
And I realized we need to come up with a name that says these people are different. And that's how Virtuoso was born in 2000.
Well, I know the journey for you. I mean, this is where I want everyone to understand this, the concept of a travel agent versus a travel advisor, because you don't ever use the word travel agent. And you've really created this concept of a travel advisor, a really elevated experience and a refined service level that then you would come to expect from someone who has a great deal of expertise and therefore is a virtuoso in their own right. So clearly you were looking to transition people's perception of the role and also turn it into a profession rather than a job.
Right.
So as opposed to someone being an order taker, now they were actually curating your holiday. It's so a far
but you know what? I want to deal that because, if you understand Virtuoso and me and my team, we are an organization. We truly believe in servant leadership, right? Our job is to listen, to understand what are the needs and things. So that's why you said earlier, did I have some grand vision? No, the grand vision was the next right step.
Right.
Like what's happening, what's evolving, how do we learn from each other? But what I'd like to share about that is the fact that what happened was, I want to be clear, there actually were travel advisors in 1950. A very little known part of travel industry history. if you look at more people booked direct with partners in 1950 than they do today, because there weren't any OTAs. And in 1950, if you dealt with Pan Am, it was like walking into Bergdorf Goodman. And there was no complexity in pricing because it was all done through bilateral government. So there were 4 airfares, day coach, day first class, night first class. So if you flew on BOAC on Pan Am, New York to London, it was exactly the same fare because it was by bilateral agreements. So no price, complexity, super high service by the partner, right? I mean, Pan Am had a beautiful shop on Fifth Avenue. Why would you use a travel agent in 1950? Same fundamental reasons they do today. It's not just that Claire, I know the GM. It's not my knowledge, but I deal with other customers in Dallas or New York or wherever that are similar to you. So I'm a conduit to community knowledge, right? And so some of those fundamentals never went away. And I'm a big believer that most innovation is not invention. Most innovation is the ability to observe naturally occurring phenomena or trends or things or whatever, and then being able to resequence them with new capabilities. The fax machine comes out, the this comes out, the that, whatever. And you just kind of re-engineer them, you resequence them, you add new capabilities, new language that connects at an emotional level, and you've got a new product.
And how did you come up with the actual name Virtuoso?
It was actually one of our executives, Keith Walden, who was our head of PR when he first came in, and then development. And then we basically, he did this thing where it was a contest, right? Where instead of going to Landor and all these big, big branding companies, we ended up giving you a name that sounded like a prescription drug, right? By the way, it was very controversial in our company. Right. The whole fact that we
became, right? It's surprising.
No. Yeah. Hindsight's 2020, right? I had a lot of people that said, because both Alan and Percival had been around since the 50s. And everybody was like, how can you change the name? I mean, look at everybody knows us, and we're gonna lose all this brand equity. And I gotta give it to Keith, because as a branding and PR expert, he literally he lost his cool one time when he kind of pounded on the desk, goes, "Oh, we're not changing the name because of everybody that know us. We're changing the name because of the millions of people that don't know us," right?
Well said. Yeah.
And so he actually ended up coming up with a name. And I have to tell you that there are people, it's revisionist history, because I'll never forget, we announced the name Virtuoso. It's kind of like, I live in Texas and Seattle, so I got a little bit of my West Coast stuff, right? So the stars aligned because decided on the name Virtuoso in between Thanksgiving and Christmas of 1999. The next meeting that was already on the books was our symposium in Vienna. Can you think of a better place to debut the name Virtuoso than in Vienna?
Oh, that's extraordinary. That's just the stars align there. I'm just going to read this for a moment, because a lot of the conversations we have on this podcast is around marketing, technology, leadership. Obviously all things that you have in spades. And I think that the branding around Virtuoso is near perfection. And I share that with you. And I've commented on this. I'm not saying that just because you're here, Matthew. I've actually used this a number of times as an example of brand positioning, a brand promise, and the whole brand identity. So I'm just going to read this out for the uninitiated. Virtuoso is the best way to travel, period. The world's top travel advisors, the brands you know, and the perks and peace of mind you won't find anywhere else. From close-to-home escapes or far-flung trips of a lifetime, a Virtuoso advisor is your resource for the insight you need to plan a safe, successful, and unforgettable vacation. Contact your perfect travel advisor now. You have packed so many words into that addresses all of the concerns, like the peace of mind, even the perks and incentives. You're not focusing on discounts.
Right.
You're focusing on perks. It's a value add.
Value.
And these are brands that you know. And so when I deconstruct that, I mean, this is a masterpiece of branding as far as I'm concerned. And so how did you go from coming up with the name Virtuoso to refine the positioning to that point? Was that a straightforward process, or is it a continual iteration?
It's a continual iteration. That definitely is a continuous iteration. And actually what's been really interesting is the fact that as we become more diverse, right? So one of the things that one of the things I talked about today, for example, is, somebody asked me recently in an interview, if you had one word around luxury travel, you could only use one word, what would it be? And it's diverse. The diverse, if you go back when I started, you go back 20, 30 years, luxury was way more homogenous. It was it kind of stood for opulence, whatever. Today, luxury is very personal. Luxury is situational. There's so many people don't have a travel persona. They have multiple travel personas. So one of the things that we have been trying to do with our latest campaign, which is So Virtuoso, is how do you, normally in branding, a brand is a shortcut to predictability, right? To consistency. Now, within my network, the way we don't tell our advisors, charge fees, don't charge fees, do this, do retainers, do this, blah, 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 blah. They're all very, very different. They have different ways of doing things. So from a consumer perspective, when you're dealing with a Virtuoso advisor, it's not like walking into a restaurant or a Louis Vuitton bag, you know exactly what you're going to get. So what we've been trying to do is, one of the people we call Virtuoso's godfather is Simon Sinek. And he wrote the wonderful book, Start With Why, right?
Yes.
So what we've tried to do is we're trying to make the Virtuoso brand a why brand, meaning that we have this incredible diversity of people and places and things and service models and all that. But the one thing that binds us together, and if you look at our So Virtuoso campaign, so caring, big-hearted, sincere, everything that's very human-centric. Because I think that, when Simon first spoke to us in 2010, when nobody had heard who he was, and then that was a heck of a year, 2-year punch, because Simon in 2010, and then we had Brene Brown in 2011. Nobody had heard of Brene Brown. But she had a great quote that said, as technology becomes more and more ubiquitous, people will not only have a desire, but a craving, like a deep human craving for authentic human connection. And I remember some of my members, she didn't get the best overall score, but it was funny because when you went into the data, she had 9s and 10s from 75% of the audience and like 5s and 6s and whatever from the other 25, because she got on stage and talked about vulnerability, and all this kind of stuff. And people were like, what the hell was that? And I remember one member who today I promised that I would never, I wouldn't give her up because today she's a huge fan of Brene, but I'll never forget her coming up to me and go, what the hell was that? Vulnerability and all this stuff and just talking about her sex life and her this and her that, but what the hell was that? And I said, you know what? We may say we're in the travel business. That's partially true. Really, the core business we're in is in the human connection business.
Right.
And there's a very specific thing about this that I want to be very practical about. The definition or what bound you to being somebody thinking you were great, let's say 30 or 40 years ago, when you were called an expert, is you were supposed to know everything better than me.
Yeah.
But really what's become now is nobody can do that. You know, and I know, any well-educated consumer know there's no way you can know everything. So vulnerability, the ability to say, let me tell you how I make a living. Let me tell you what I did. Let me tell you what I don't know. Let me whatever. And having a collaborative relationship with a customer where you have the guts to say, I don't know, but I can find out. And this is where Virtuoso comes in as a value proposition, because you're not supposed to know everything, but we're there to give you the backup.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting when you mentioned about Simon Sinek and you being onto that very early on, is that clearly with the Start With Why, the premise of that, of course, is people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
Exactly.
And I had that sense when I was at your Virtuoso conference that there is an incredible culture and people are just exuding confidence and just they're so passionate about being part of Virtuoso. So seeing you on stage and being a part of the audience, it had a real wow factor because people are kind of waiting with bated breath for the next announcement. And people are very supportive of each other. It's you hear that you can hear the chatter, and so people are passionate about travel. They're passionate about their customers, and they just love the whole industry and the experience. So what you've built is extraordinary. And I just wanted to touch on where you've built this business to today. So I know some of these stats. You obviously know them all that much better, but I mean, there was about 5,000 people that came together in Vegas, which you do every year, and it's the Bellagio, and you've been there for like 20 years, or 22 years. You have more than 20,000 globally travel advisors. And the top line number I remember from the conference, which I hesitated mentioning before because I wasn't sure if we share that number, but it was $32 billion.
Yeah, it's on a normalized basis, it runs somewhere between 26 and 30 billion. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So but that's total production of all air, all that. That's not just the Virtuoso. That is the sales of all of our member agencies.
Right.
So that would include some of their corporate, their incentive business and all that, but just overall.
But just truly extraordinary to think where the industry was 20 years ago and where it is today, and what you've built and what you've created. So which brings me to the big question, which is, what brings you to Forbes and the summit? Clearly everyone's thrilled that you're here. And, you're a much loved and well known figure in the industry. And so I can think of many reasons why you'd be here and people are thrilled to be here. But what actually brings you here, Matthew?
Well, first of all, I mean, obviously I've known Forbes for a long time, and I've been peripheral to it, but I think first of all, they started their whole outreach to the travel professional. So many Forbes, rated properties are Virtuoso. The human connection piece. Also for me, when Herman took over, I've known Herman, all these years. And so I think a lot of their initiatives, so primarily it's here to wave the flag of the role of the travel profession, the travel advisor, who we are. Very proud that, we have an incredible group of Virtuoso travel advisors here. And it's just a constant reminder. And I want them, one of the things that's a very big part of our DNA is, in fact, in probably one of the worst time trade articles ever, which was my third time on the cover of Luxury Travel Advisor, that came out in April of 2020. So you can imagine, right? I remember running to read that article thinking, because of course I did the interview, months and months before. I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I say in that? Now that we're literally in the middle of COVID. But you know what? It's so funny. I don't remember anything else about the article, except I remember one really important thing. I said, you know what? This is an organization where you have to believe that there's more to be gained by sharing than there is to keeping to yourself. And so therefore, takers do not apply. I am a big believer there are multiple ways of being successful, but at our core, we're here to basically learn. And so one of the things that I love is when you have Virtuosos come here, they're learning from this environment. But then we go back and we share a lot of stuff. So there are Virtuosos on so many, they're sitting on boards of countries and destinations and partners and whatever. And we're always sharing with each other to help us grow. So one is to show our support of true luxury, which Forbes represents, to be here to support Herman and the team at Forbes, and to also have another interaction point. And for me, one of the things that I loved last year when Herman asked me to speak, he told me that there would also be a lot of asset and revenue managers here. And I wanted a shot at that audience because my talk last year was the economics of human connection. And basically what I wanted to do was use the case study of the evolution of the travel advisor to prove that this whole thing of human connection is not just some touchy-feely little, slogan. It is serious business. It's real economics.
Yeah.
Right. And I want, because one of the problems that some of the asset and revenue managers, they look at it, focus on net ADR. It's like when sometimes when these guys, they look at this stuff and they're all number based. One of the reasons that Bernard Arnault is always in competition with Jeff Bezos is that a lot of European true luxury companies, they do a much better job of understanding how to measure or value the immeasurable, what's not on the spreadsheet. And so sometimes, sometimes when these asset managers, why are we paying all this commission? For God's sakes, look at your ADR.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because that's an audience that I didn't realize it existed here at the Forbes conference. Obviously, I've seen a number of your colleagues that are Virtuoso. There's a number of travel advisors here as well, luxury travel advisors. But there's also these asset managers that are constantly tracking the value of hotels, and that's the business that they're in. So there's many different aspects to the Forbes Summit. I know they put on a great event, and a lot of it is the content driven. Clearly, having you as a speaker, Chip, who you mentioned, Rafat Ali, who we were speaking to just before, is speaking here tomorrow. And so it's content rich. And even actually before we started our session, you were in an AI session, and we share a common friend in Gilad Berenstein. And
who's on my board?
He's on your board, and he recently spoke at our AI summit, and he's a great technology expert. So what are some of the other aspects of the Forbes event that maybe you guys don't? I know you have a technology day. I was privileged to be a part of it this year at Virtuoso, so that's a passion and a strong focus for you, I know. Is there anything that they do at the Forbes Summit that isn't something you do at Virtuoso?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, thank you for asking that, because that I think one thing that last year and today, us being on this side, listening to what they curate to help them run their businesses better.
Right.
So we get to learn not by having content that was directed to us, but learning from this content directed towards the operation, successful operation, challenges and opportunities of being in the hospitality business.
Yeah.
So it makes us all more empathetic and understanding of trying to find solutions and things to do to help each other.
Yeah. Well, what stood out to me, and especially you mentioning travel advisor and the luxury segment, many of the guests I've spoken to today have been general managers or managing directors of the top 5-star hotels around the world. They all come here to celebrate the achievement of their recognition of being a 5-star Forbes recognized hotel. And it's a great accomplishment for them. And they learn and network with each other so that they can retain that level of excellence. And that's their commitment to each other, themselves, and to their teams that they're going back home to. And I know how well respected you are from your team as well. So that even hearing the GMs also mention how important travel advisors are, and they use the word travel advisors. And I thought of you again, Matthew, and I was sitting here. It's just like, I'm going to be speaking to Matthew later. It's just like, not everyone has to know that you created that term, but it is quite special. So you obviously are a global traveler. You've got your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening in the travel industry. And so there's no better person I could possibly ask about travel trends. And I know we don't have 3 hours. So I would love to get your view on maybe some of the macro trends that are happening globally with travel this year that you're paying attention to.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've never seen ADRs like we have today, right? The question that everybody keeps asking, I mean, I remember coming out of COVID and people say, oh my God, revenge travel, blah, blah, blah. How long can these ADRs, how long can they last, et cetera, et cetera. I said, well, I think a minimum of a year. I think it could be as much as 5 years. I think the ADR, if you want to call it a bubble, I think if it does burst, I don't think it's going to be one burst. I think there's going to be those properties that are actually able to maintain the level of that. How did you make me feel? Today we had a great speaker, the luxury guy. He put it pretty blank. He goes, the F word in luxury. I love that. Fine. No, people are not willing to pay. They've put up with it. And that was part of my speech last year was, if you don't invest in the human element of all this, if you don't really work on, then that's where you're going to see the fall off. I think the properties and the hospitality businesses that could really maintain that, how did you make me feel? That's going to be what maintains the margin. Now, I remember last year, my name's going blank, but the head of CBRE, right?
Okay, yeah.
The only thing that kind of depressed me a little bit last year about his presentation was he basically said that there's just going to be so much more demand than there is capacity. And the only bad thing about that is that leaves a lot of people off the hook to delivering what they ought to be delivering. So that's where Forbes comes in. That's where Virtuoso comes in, whatever, because my job and Forbes' job is to make sure that people are getting what they pay for.
Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, the ADR, which for those of the uninitiated, the average day rate or the daily rate for a hotel room, which you do hear people now complaining quite regularly about the cost of every hotel room. And certainly some of that was to make up for our lost revenue during COVID. And then there's just a huge amount of demand. Peter Greenberg, who I was speaking to earlier today, who's obviously a friend of yours as well, he is concerned just that there is so much price gouging out there, and that there is people have extended themselves with their credit cards. And one of the questions I asked him that I'd like to ask you is that, it seems as though the luxury market is much more resilient. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, if that's what you're seeing, meaning that, that top line revenue that you're seeing as we go into 24 and 25, there are many people that are saying at some point the party has to stop. It's just been a surge of activity, and it hasn't yet. So, but it feels like we're always in the travel industry waiting for the shoe to drop.
It's interesting. I think that's why I'm saying I don't think it's I think there are geopolitical, there are environmental factors, there are a number of things that will create bumps in the road. But also remember this, we're still missing 100 million Chinese travelers. They haven't come back yet. I'm about to go to Beijing and Shanghai and visit my team there and all that. And they're coming back slowly, but remember, in 2019, there was 100 million Chinese travelers. The average Chinese traveler in the United States was paying $8,000 per trip, which was more than 40% more than any other country. So we'll see how that shapes out. But let's remember why travel hit its high water mark in 2019 and what's driving it. First of all, never in the history of the planet have we ever had 5 generations of people traveling at the same time in the numbers they have. So here's a great statistic from Dr. Ken Dykewald. Roughly 2/3, 66% of all human beings that have ever reached the age of 65, not in the last 100 years, not in the last 1,000 years, since the beginning of mankind, are alive today. 2/3 of all human beings that have ever reached the age of 65 are alive today. When Chip talks about his new book, Learning to Love Midlife, he's basically talking about the average American is going to live to 80. So you've got this massive longevity revolution in the Western world. You have the rise of the rest. In the younger generations, you have the prioritization of experiences over goods, right? And these are massive, massive macro. And then put a big dose of nothing motivates human behavior like having something taken away from you that you took for granted, as in COVID. And we've realized that this is a precious thing to us, right? So, so I think that, so I'm still very bullish. I think my main message is I don't think it's going to be one big bubble. I think hopefully what I want to see happen is those that really make the investment and making it worthwhile to pay what I pay for will keep getting paid.
Yeah.
Those that it's not, see, I don't call it as much, and Peter here, I'm very dear friends. I understand what he's saying when he says price gouging. But the problem is, if I charge something and you don't want to pay and I got 3 people waiting, is that just capitalism or whatever? What I don't like is when the service isn't there. And I think that's where it's going to be an asynchronous bubble that bursts. I don't think it's going to be across the board.
Well, one more trend I do need to ask you about, because I know you even mentioned that you started doing software development, and I know you're very passionate about technology, and you've got a great turn of phrase that I'd love for you to share, because I'd rather many of people who know you know this phrase. What can you share your perfect phrase that kind of almost very well defines the difference between AI and humans?
Yeah, so it's a term that I've always been a big believer that there's 2 fundamental uses of technology. One is to replace human beings, and one is to make them better, right? So I don't know, 20 years ago, whatever it was, that's always been my passion. And it's basically automate the predictable so that you can humanize the exceptional. Now, let me add one little thing about exceptional. Exceptional doesn't just mean good. Exceptional means bad. So anybody that is worth their salt in hospitality will tell you that some of the best loyalty in hospitality is not created when everything goes perfect. Some of the best loyalty is created when something goes terribly wrong And it's in that service recovery. It's in the way you fix it that a lot of the greatest loyalty is created. So when I say humanize the exceptional, no amount of AI saying I'm sorry is going to matter, right? It's a visceral human thing. And so that's what so for me, everything we can do to take away anything that's rote, anything that's a waste of time that allows people. And by the way, I also believe that's going to help recruiting of talent also, because I think when all these industries are able to bring people in at a higher level of interface, I think it's gonna also help in a lot of different ways.
So the one last question on this topic, and then I want to know about your travel plans for the year and make sure that everyone knows how to find out more information about Virtuoso as well. But when we think about AI, and I know this is another topic that we could spend a lot more time on, but I would just love for you to be able to share some of your views on where you see it going this year, when it comes to travel advisors and it comes to Virtuoso. How are you seeing AI from your vantage point in your organization?
Well, I think I think today's panel was right on the money. I think basically, number one, and Gilad said it really well. He goes, if you have an AI strategy, things are changing so fast. It's like, so take very usable use cases. I think the first is to apply it internally, right? To use it for internal productivity, making making useful information or knowledge better, more easily accessible. So things like that. And we're like everybody else. I mean, we migrated everything to Azure 2 years ago, did all this stuff. It's amazing what you can do with what's already there. So play with it. There's a lot of interesting B2C use cases. We'll see more of that. But I would really focus right now on just getting familiar with it, getting familiar with the terminology, picking use cases like that. But there is one thing that I want to say about AI that I have in I do these forums where I'm about, I go around. There's one gentleman that I also follow. His name is Shelley Palmer, who's an AI expert. He had a particular newsletter, something he did, where he talks about ushering in the age of distrust.
Of distrust.
Distrust.
Yeah.
And so the reality is, we've always known you could Photoshop. So I'll give you an example. During Thanksgiving this year, I love college football. I don't know if you watched the Galaxy, whatever, the Google Pixel.
Yes.
Right? I must have seen that ad 100 times over the Thanksgiving. The new one that has the best shot?
Yep, yeah, of course.
Where you take a photo and everybody's looking in a different direction and you literally just hit a button and change everybody's face.
Yeah.
And after watching that for 100 times, I wanted to write a note to Google. I said, look, I already knew you could Photoshop, but basically what this ad has told me is I literally can't believe anything I see. So I can't believe anything is written, anything I see, anything I listen to, anything I watch. It's actually going to make human validation and relationships of trust even more valuable.
Yeah, it's true. You're seeing examples now where people are heading to waterfalls that don't exist because they use a computer AI generated. So people are being manipulated. There's a distrust. So that's a really important point to make.
So it's going to be like your value proposition, but this was AI generated, but I sent it to you in an email or whatever, and I validated it.
Yeah.
Like I stand behind this.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah.
Two other trends. I mean, there's two other trends I just want to make that actually have accelerated. These are more like mega trends, right? Bigger meta trends, right? Number one is what I call the creative tension of travelers between the desire to go back to places they really know and love, but they want to see it differently, and the creative tension with wanting to go to discover new places. So that's a very interesting creative tension that has a real opportunity for innovation and curation. So for example, one of the destinations that I love, I can't wait, we're going to have our chairman's event there this year, is Slovenia. Slovenia is this really cool country, really coming up. It's one of the most sustainable countries in all of Europe. But you go to somewhere and it's the combination. So we're not starting to do things like go to Venice, but did you know that when you're in Venice, You're now only a 2.5-hour high-speed train ride from Slovenia, right there. So the ability to combine things like that, that's a really good one. The other one is, remember when we were in, I can't remember what grade this was, but remember that science experiment when we were kids where you had the science teacher, you had a jar, and you had rocks, pebbles, and sand,
Yeah, I know this one.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
And they said, this fits in that jar, but only a certain way. Well, you had to put in the rocks, then the pebbles and shake it around, then the sand. And that's something that we're also starting to see is that sophisticated travelers, what they're starting to do is they're starting to look at kind of their big anchor tenant, big rock, milestone trips over the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, working on those way in advance. Then their pebbles are more like they're more like their annual thing. And the sand is kind of like, oh my God, there's a special promotion. It's kind of like the grocery store capstan, right? Oh, I'll take
Yeah.
I'll take a pack of gum at, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it's very interesting because we've been working on this. A lot of Virtuoso advisors have been helping their clients plan that way for a long way, kind of holistically and kind of, just kind of organically. But now more and more, we're literally trying to turn that into a way of doing business that really changes it. So the idea is, why would you have a financial advisor in your life? To have a conscious plan to optimize your financial assets, but not have a collaborator in your life to help you have a conscious plan to optimize your most valuable non-renewable asset, your free leisure time. Why are you just leaving that up to whim?
So true.
And
So true.
when you place that concept in front of a lot of people, they're like, it just takes the whole profession to a whole nother level.
Yeah, that's such a valuable insight. And you mentioned you had two more. That was one.
Well, that was one that was
Yeah.
the way we book travel in rocks, pebbles, and sand, and the other one was this creative tension.
Got it. I love that one too because of the idea that the world is finite and there are only so many countries you can travel to and so many places and so many seasons. And I remember when I started traveling, I was concerned it was all happening too fast, but there's so many places you can go back to and see differently.
Well, in off-season travel, by the way, like I went to Rwanda. I mean, I'm actually ashamed because I grew up, as I said, my dad was the chairman of the African Travel Association, but I went to Rwanda for the first time this year. Blown away. Just unbelievable, right? But what really blew me away was the fact that I just wasn't aware of anyway, it was amazing.
So when I spoke to another common friend we have, Shane O'Flaherty
Yeah.
from Microsoft, and I was speaking to him last night and I was telling him how excited I was to interview you today. And he was like, ask him about WTTC in Rwanda and that trip. And so he was very keen. And I wanted to make sure, was it just a remarkable experience to go and travel
Well,
there?
first of all, that was the crazy thing about it is that it's like, first of all, Africa is one of my favorite places to go. There's a great saying that I grew up with, which you leave Africa, but Africa never leaves you, right? But I had not been to Rwanda. And of course, the gorilla trekking was as magnificent, amazing experiences ever. But what really blew me away was I didn't realize what that country, what's come out of the genocide. I mean, it's one of the cleanest countries, and I don't mean African countries. I mean, one of the cleanest countries I've ever seen in the world. The entire country stops. We happen to arrive on the last Saturday of the month, which is they have the thing called Umuganda, where the entire country stops unless you're very elderly or very young. Everybody goes out and does a service project in their community every Saturday, which is why they don't have any plastic trash, because when they first started it, it was all around plastic. Now they're, so we planted trees, then they have community, but it was the overall experience of going to Rwanda was, and then the other thing I remember telling the minister of tourism and the head of the Rwandan Development Board, I said, Minister, I realized after being here such a short time, I realized that Rwanda is not a sustainable destination. And he looked at me like, is this guy, what do you mean we're not sustainable? I said, no, actually, you are one of the best examples I now have in the world for regenerative travel, meaning sustainable means let's not make it worse. Let's keep it the way it is. So what they are doing with the expansion of Volcanoes National Park, what they are doing with it, that's up in then they have the chimps, then they have the big five So they're making it better. They're not just trying to maintain it, right? And my friend Keith Vincent, who's the CEO of Wilderness Safaris, as well as our friends over at Singita, I mean, it was one and only a winner. But that was what's amazing, is that they're rewilding, and it blew me away. And by the way, I always thought of Rwanda as a place you would go after you've been to Africa a few times. But I kind of came back thinking, you know what? If anybody's kind of nervous about going to Africa for the first time, maybe Rwanda is the first place they should go, because it's so safe, it's so clean, it's so well organized. It was amazing.
Well, I see people wearing the jerseys with soccer teams in the UK with a visit Rwanda, and having that reaction to, would you actually visit Rwanda? So it's amazing for those people listening to this and hearing your story. I'm sure it's opening up a lot of minds to traveling to a destination they wouldn't even have had on their radar.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the ultimate question as to your travel plans for this year. I know you travel a lot. You clearly love it. What is on your list for this year of personal travel?
Well, the reality
or do you want to go back to?
Well, the reality is that my schedule does get driven a lot by Virtuoso events that sunset never, the sun never sets nowadays. But for example, next week I'm going to Bangkok for our Asia and Australia forum, but then I'm taking my youngest son to Beijing and to Shanghai, which I'm sorry to say I hadn't been back since 2019. But I really am excited to go back there and reconnect. Amazing people there.
So much to look forward to.
So much to look forward to.
That's great. Life is so good, and I'm just so pleased that we've had the opportunity to connect like this. I've so looked forward to meeting you and having a conversation like this, and it's lived up to all my expectations. It's such an honor. Thank you so much, Matthew, for being here, and I wish you and the Virtuoso team much continued success.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.